Just before her passing, Queen Elizabeth summoned Princess Anne into her private quarters. It wasn't formal, and it wasn't planned. It was a quiet moment, mother and daughter alone, sharing something that would never be written down. No journalists, no courtiers, no flashing cameras, just two women who had weathered decades of history together. But what the Queen said that day wasn't about Anne. It wasn't even about Charles or William, the two men long presumed to carry her legacy. It was about someone no one expected. Catherine. And kept those words locked away for years, holding them like a sacred trust. Not because they were scandalous or controversial, but because they were powerful. So powerful, in fact, that when she finally did share them, King Charles was left stunned, not angry, not confused, just speechless. Because somewhere deep in his heart, he had known. But hearing it aloud made it real. The Queen hadn't chosen him. She hadn't even chosen her beloved grandson, William. She had chosen Catherine, the quiet force who married into the family and yet somehow became its soul. The Queen didn't speak in proclamations. She never needed a podium to make her meaning clear. Her faith in Catherine came not from grand gestures, but from years of quiet observation. In a family that had often been torn apart by scandal, by ego, by the relentless pressure of public life, Catherine had stood firm. She hadn't just survived, she had elevated the institution by simply being who she was. And the Queen had noticed. That message wasn't meant to shift the line of succession. It wasn't about titles or crowns. It was about trust. Enduring, unshakable trust in a woman who had never demanded it, but had earned it through every quiet act of grace. And said the Queen didn't hesitate. Her words were clear: Catherine will be the one who holds them together. Not Charles, not William. Catherine. The outsider who had become the glue. And that's what left Charles unable to speak. Because in those few carefully chosen words, his mother had issued not just a wish but a verdict. The weight of that message lingers now, rippling through the monarchy like an echo from beyond the grave. But why Catherine? What did the Queen see in her that others missed? Queen Elizabeth had always been a master observer. She didn't need fanfare to notice what truly mattered. In a family where noise often drowned reason, the Queen relied on something else: stillness. And for years, she watched Catherine from the shadows of duty. Not as a monarch sizing up a successor, but as a mother, a grandmother, and ultimately, the guardian of a legacy built on steadiness. What she saw wasn't royalty rehearsed for cameras. It was something deeper. Catherine's grace was effortless. Her humility unwavering. And above all, her resilience, quiet but undeniable. Where others flinched under pressure or buckled beneath attention, Catherine didn't retreat. But neither did she seek the spotlight. She simply showed up, over and over again. Whether praised or criticized, adored or scrutinized, she remained constant. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She didn't need to pose to be seen. In a world obsessed with image, Catherine became the rare figure who embodied substance. And that caught the Queen's eye in ways no press headline ever could. Princess Anne later admitted that this was precisely what her mother had feared: the monarchy might lose a grounded presence amidst a rising tide of performance. The Queen had witnessed a world unraveling: social media storms, televised scandals, and an institution once revered now placed under a microscope. She knew the future would demand more than charm or heritage. It would demand someone who could lead without ego, endure without breaking, and stand tall without ever pushing others down. In Catherine, she saw all three. And while others around her chased relevance, Catherine stayed anchored. That strength wasn't loud, but it was deeply rooted. The Queen recognized that kind of quiet power because she had once wielded it herself, not with declarations but with duty, not with defiance but with dignity. And that paralleled the unspoken bond between the old Queen and the future Princess of Wales. It was forged not in words but in spirit. Catherine wasn't molded by royalty. She wasn't born into palaces or bred for protocol. Her strength came from something older, something purer, a life shaped by balance, by values, by the kind of invisible lessons that no title can teach. And that's exactly what drew the Queen in. It wasn't bloodline that mattered. It was backbone. It was the invisible steel that Catherine carried beneath her soft tone and gentle smile. To outsiders, she may have appeared passive, but to the Queen, she was a pillar, silent, unshakable, essential. Not because she wanted power, but because she didn't. And that's what made her worthy of it. In the Queen's final years, as questions swirled about succession, modern relevance, and survival, she made her choice. Not with a grand proclamation, but with quiet conviction. Catherine was the one who could hold the house together not as a symbol, but as its soul. But Catherine's strength didn't begin within royal walls. Her poise wasn't sculpted in gold or softened by privilege. No, her calm came from somewhere else entirely, something more human, more real. And it was that very origin that made her destiny all the more extraordinary. Before she ever wore a tiara, Catherine Middleton understood what it meant to work hard, stay humble, and move with quiet purpose. Hers wasn't a story born in castles or carved in ceremony. It began in a modest home where values mattered more than titles, and grace wasn't taught, it was lived. Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, both worked for British Airways. One a dispatcher, the other a former flight attendant. Their careers weren't glamorous, but they were grounded in routine, responsibility, and relentless discipline. And in that environment, Catherine grew up learning that effort mattered more than applause. Though her family belonged to the middle class, they moved through British society with ease and quiet confidence. The Middletons weren't royalty, but they weren't outsiders either. On her father's side, the family had old connections to high society, great-grandparents who had once hosted members of the royal family. That history brought a sense of Polish. But on her mother's side, there was grit. Her maternal roots reached back to coal miners and labourers. That contrast between legacy and labour, tradition and tenacity, gave Catherine something few people in the royal spotlight ever possess: balance. That balance was tested early. When she was just 2 years old, the family moved to Jordan, a leap across cultures, away from comfort zones, into a land unfamiliar and complex. There, she attended an English-speaking nursery and adapted quickly. The experience didn't just broaden her perspective. It taught her how to remain steady in new worlds, how to observe before acting, and how to blend strength with silence. Even at that age, Catherine was being shaped not by entitlement, but by exposure, learning how to carry herself with grace in places where she didn't yet belong. When they returned to England, Catherine was 4. She enrolled in private schools, where she didn't merely blend in, she rose. At St. Andrews, she excelled in both academics and athletics. Teachers noticed her quiet confidence. She wasn't loud, she wasn't showy, but she led. Whether it was field hockey or class projects, Catherine became someone others relied on. That quiet reliability, something the Queen would later call the most underrated kind of strength, wasn't just a habit. It was a trait rooted in her upbringing, reinforced by every challenge she met with poise rather than protest. And it wasn't just about performance. It was how she carried herself, the way she handled success, and even more telling, the way she handled pressure. She never needed to dominate a room to be respected. Her strength came from within, a kind of self-control that didn't waver even when tested. Teachers, classmates, and even strangers would later recall that Catherine had a rare kind of composure for someone so young, a balance of confidence and humility that made her magnetic without ever demanding attention. It was this emotional equilibrium that caught the attention of those who watched her from afar, including Queen Elizabeth. Because in a family often disrupted by excess, rebellion, and spectacle, Catherine's quiet steadiness stood out. But it wasn't just her upbringing that defined her. It was the decisions she made as she stepped into adulthood, deliberate, bold, and far from expected, that revealed just how rare her character truly was. And it was those very choices that would soon pull her into history's path. While others her age rushed toward careers or chased crowns they hadn't yet earned, Catherine Middleton paused not to stall her journey, but to shape it.